Happy New Year. I know it's pretty nerdy, but I can't help starting this way. Today is the first Sunday in Advent, which is also the first day of the church calendar. We now have walked through one entire liturgical year together from start to finish, and today we begin again. Advent invites us into that holy practice of beginning again. Our Advent series this year is entitled Those Who Dream. This Advent, my hope is that we will tap into the dreamer in all of us. This Advent, we will dream alongside of prophets and angels, Mary and the Magi. We will lean into the holy dreams that we see in our scriptures with eyes turned in anticipation toward God's dreams for our own world. Like most of 2020, this year Advent seems really different. We are entering into Advent in the midst of a pandemic that has altered nearly everything that we do, from the way we work to the way we worship and almost everything in between. Advent is a season of waiting. And oh my goodness, it seems like that's all we've been doing. We've been waiting. Well, Advent is just beginning today. We have been waiting for quite some time now. We've been waiting through an excruciating election season. We've been waiting for votes to be counted and for results to be certified. We've been waiting for a vaccine. Some are getting impatient and are not waiting, but instead gathering anyway, and this is causing problems of its own. We've been waiting to gather. We've now been at this distancing thing for over 8 months. And if my calculations are correct, today is the 37th Sunday that we have been worshiping online. Especially as we are coming into this holy season, a season full of so many traditions that we love and time that we typically will celebrate with family and friends, this waiting is hard. We long to be together, and yet we faithfully wait. Waiting has been put into an entirely different perspective this year. We begin our Advent this year in the Gospel of Mark, and not with a story of angels or shepherds or even expectant mothers. In fact, Mark doesn't even have any of these stories. Instead, we begin by placing ourselves in the context of the first century in Israel. It is not a context of heavenly peace. It is a context of war, destruction, oppression, and violence. The context into which the Gospel of Mark is written was violent and dangerous. Scholars believe Mark to be written either just before or right in the middle of or immediately following the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. It is written into a context of a city at siege, starvation, destruction, violence, not only at the hands of the Roman Empire, but also at the hands of rival groups of insurgents who each thought that they had the answer and were recruiting people to fight for power for their side. It is into this context that Mark writes his account in the life of Jesus. Just before this passage, we read from the Gospel of Mark, that we will read from the Gospel of Mark today. Jesus warned his disciples about the impending destruction of the temple. And the disciples were wanting to know the specifics. They wanted to know how and when. Jesus warned them not to fall prey to false Christs or false prophets who would appear, that would offer signs and wonders in order to deceive. Jesus offered this little apocalypse as this little sermon has come to be called, warning those who dream to keep alert. Our gospel passage for today comes from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 13, verses 24 through 37. In those days after the suffering of that time, the sun will become dark and the moon won't give its light. The stars will fall from the sky and the planets and other heavenly bodies will be shaken. Then they will see the human one coming in the clouds with great power and splendor. Then he will send the angels and gather together his chosen people from the four corners of the earth, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. Learn this parable from the fig tree. After its branch becomes tender and it sprouts new leaves, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see these things happening, you know that he's near, at the door. I assure you that this generation won't pass until all these things happen. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will certainly not pass away. But nobody knows when that day or hour will come. Not the angels in heaven nor the Son. Only the Creator knows. Watch out. Stay alert. You don't know when the time is coming. It is as if someone took a trip, left the household behind, and put the servants in charge, giving each one a job to do, and told the doorkeeper to stay alert. Therefore, stay alert. You don't know when the head of the household will come, whether it is in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows in the early morning or at daybreak. Don't let him show up when you weren't expecting and find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to all. Stay alert. The Advent passages that are chosen in the lectionary are always so intriguing to me, and never the ones that I would pick if I was on my own. Right at the time when I am decking my halls and wanting to get myself into that Christmas spirit, the lectionary provides us with warnings that do not at all seem festive. Today is the Sunday of hope. Did that sound hopeful? Advent begins in despair, suffering, fear, and pain. This passage just makes my head spin. On the one hand, this passage is filled with scary warnings. Brace yourself. We are in for a bumpy ride. It is bad now, but it is about to get much worse before it gets any better. On the other hand, it seems to be counseling readers to stay faithful, to be vigilant, to dig in, and to do good work for the long haul. After all, you don't know when all of this will come to be. All you can do is faithfully do what you've been entrusted to do to the best of your ability. Now is not the time to push in the clutch. As scary as it might be, now is not the time to give up the way that Jesus has taught. This section of Mark is often referred to as the little apocalypse. An apocalypse sounds really, really scary to me. We've all seen the movies. But the interesting thing is that because most of us have lived relatively secure lives, books and movies are our frame of reference for the kind of destruction and chaos that Mark is writing of and living in. I've read about it. I've tried to empathize, but I haven't experienced war or famine firsthand. This is a privilege of mine. But the author of Mark did not have to imagine. He was living this horror. He didn't have to imagine scary, violent things. He didn't have to imagine instability and insecurity. This was his reality. Thanks to movies, we have come to understand the word apocalypse as the end of the world. And yet the word apocalypse means an unfolding, an unveiling of things previously unknown. Bible scholar Bart Ehrman has defined apocalypse as a vision of heavenly secrets that can make sense of earthly realities. In the context of Mark, this is not something to be feared, but desired. A vision of heavenly secrets that can make sense of earthly realities is something incredibly hopeful in a context where reality just doesn't make sense. Apocalyptic literature in the Bible is not meant to scare, but to inspire hope. This week I've had in my head that REM song, "It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine." In March, at the beginning of the pandemic lockdowns, the downloads and streaming of this song surged as we began to awaken to the threat of COVID-19. As we at Wellspring were talking about the new normal and not wanting to go back to the old normal, but instead to learn and to gain wisdom from this time, lots of people were singing, "It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine." From our vantage, it's hard to understand how Mark's little apocalypse is hopeful. It's hard to place ourselves in the story because to locate ourselves in the context of Mark's gospel and Mark's Jesus and disciples, we would have to lose pretty much everything. We would have to find ourselves at the very bottom, poor, under an oppressive Roman Empire with no protection, no voice, and seemingly no hope for a tomorrow that is any different or any better than today. Mark and the first readers of his gospel were already at this place of devastation beyond our most horrifying dreams. To place ourselves in this story is to place ourselves in a nightmare. But to those who are devastated, the end of the world as they know it sounds pretty good, really hopeful. The end of the world could mean hope for a new world. In his book, The Binding of the Strong Man, Ched Myers wrote this of this passage in Mark. Jesus has been revealed as a truly subversive proponent of messianic revolution. But how does his ideology and practice relate to the historical moment in which Mark writes? For there's already an insurrection in Palestine, which is promising to restore the fortunes of Israel by driving out the Romans with the sword. Should Mark's community join forces with the rebels? To this moment, Jesus speaks, warning against the temptation to seize power as a way of overthrowing the powers, and in the tradition of Jeremiah, exhorts the disciples and reader to abandon the defense of Jerusalem in its most crucial hours. Instead, he says, we must look more deeply into history in order to commence the revolutionary process at the roots. He thus closes his sermon with an apocalyptic meditation calling for historical vigilance. Jesus is letting us in on the dream. Jesus warns, keep awake, keep alert while you are waiting for this dream to unfold. The way of Jesus is inviting us into an entirely new world, the end of the world as we know it. Not merely a shifting around of the world by the sword, so that new powers of a new regime can take the place of the old regime. Second verse, same as the first. But something entirely new and worth the wait, as long as the wait may be. This year, it feels like all we've been doing is waiting. I started to notice, I don't know, October, maybe even earlier, people posting on social media that they were putting up their Christmas trees. And they were including statements that said, "Don't judge me. I need some hope, and this makes me happy." It's hard to wait for that inbreaking of hope and peace and joy and love that we so desire. It's really easy to grow impatient. In many ways, the time that we are living in right now feels like a mini apocalypse of its own, if defined as an unfolding or unveiling of things not previously known, or more precisely for our context, acknowledged. When it comes to racial injustice in our nations, our eyes are being opened to new to us perspectives that aren't new at all, but are being unveiled. Our hearts are being broken. Our eyes are being opened. And now we are starting to see. And we just want things to change. Looking injustice in the face is painful, and we want it to stop as quickly as possible. But our friends and our neighbors of color have been waiting for a long time. Jesus says, keep awake, keep alert while we are waiting. With the rise in awareness and focus on racial injustice following George Floyd's murder in the spring, the words "keep awake" speak to me in a very different way this year. We've had our eyes opened to things, and so how do we keep awake? How do we not allow ourselves to become drowsy or forgetful, or to become impatient and willing to settle for less than the whole dream? Ched Myers called Jesus' mini apocalypse sermon in Mark a sermon for revolutionary patience. It is a call for an active waiting. It's not about doing nothing. It's about doing good. It's about walking in the way of the life-changing humility and love that Jesus exemplified for us. Staying awake and alert is a revolutionary patience that is anything but easy. But it also feels like grounding ourselves in hope. In our reading for book group this week, Richard Rohr wrote this of hope. Christian hope is different from optimism. Christian hope has nothing to do with the belief that tomorrow is necessarily going to be better than today. Jesus seems to be saying that if even one mustard seed is sprouting, or one dime found, or one sheep recovered, and I would add one fig branch blossoming, that is enough reason for a big party. Even a small indicator of God is still an indicator of God, and therefore an indicator of reason, meaning, and joy. A little bit of God goes a long way. This Advent, on this Sunday of hope, what are you waiting for? What are you dreaming of? Where are you finding hope? And while you wait and dream and hope, what does it look like to stay awake?